pregnant wife was kicked out mistress, spent millionaire husband's money, and vanished. Listen closely to the story of a devastating betrayal that rocked an entire family, where a pregnant wife was left with nothing, while a cunning mistress pulled all the strings. In the span of a few weeks, a once loving husband banished his own wife from their mansion, choosing to chase wild promises whispered by a deceitful woman. But when that mistress vanished after spending millions of his fortune, the betrayal soared to unimaginable heights. Now everything stands on the brink of collapse. Racked by regret and abandoned by those he trusted most, the husband discovers that karma's revenge is more vicious than he ever could have foreseen. Edward Aldridge had always lived his life amid gilded opulence. Born into the illustrious Aldridge family, known throughout London for their real estate and financial empire, he had enjoyed privileges few people could imagine. From an early age, Edward was primed to continue the legacy of Aldridge Holdings, the prestigious family conglomerate dealing in everything from property developments to private equity. Despite this lofty background, he never saw himself as irresponsible or heartless. On the contrary, Edward had a reputation for kindness, at least to those he respected. That kindness, however, was not boundless. In the same breath that he would donate thousands of pounds to a charity, he could easily, if angered, turn the full weight of his wealth and influence against anyone who crossed him. Yet it was this very duality, a combination of generosity and unyielding pride, that made him so compelling to those around him and so dangerous to those who got too close. Claire Matthews met Edward 8 years ago at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital in London. She was a bright young lawyer, recently graduated from the University of Cambridge, working pro bono cases on behalf of disadvantaged families. That night, her modest black cocktail dress stood out amid designer gowns from Versace and Chanel. Edward was immediately captivated by her authenticity. She was neither overly enamored by wealth nor intimidated by affluence. Their connection was instant. Within 2 years, they were married in the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Paris, under crystal chandeliers that sparkled like the city's night sky. Claire and Edward's union was hailed in society pages as the merge of two dynasties, the Aldridge Empire with the Matthews family's venerable line of successful attorneys. But behind the media fanfare was a genuine love story, born of mutual admiration and unwavering support. In the early years, Edward's father, Harold Aldridge, a calculating and sometimes ruthlessly pragmatic man, worried that Claire's down-to-earth nature might clash with the demands of running Aldridge Holdings. However, she endeared herself by offering brilliant legal counsel for the company's more delicate deals. She advised them on everything from intricate international laws to philanthropic structures that would preserve the Aldridge image. Soon, Harold saw her as an asset rather than a threat. But no amount of familial acceptance or high society blessing could protect Claire from the battles that fester in the shadows. As Edward climbed higher in the business world, becoming CEO of Aldridge Holdings at the age of 32, he began to change. The corporate realm adored him. He was a dynamic leader, decisive in his negotiations, well-spoken at press conferences, and charismatic at board meetings. International banks, including Goldman Sachs, courted him for partnerships. Articles praised his mastery in business. The only worry that continued to gnaw at Claire was how Edward's ambition might overshadow the simpler things in life, like starting a family. The couple had, at first, decided to wait. With Edward's relentless schedule, it seemed wise to stabilize the empire before introducing a baby into the world. But life had other plans. Just as Aldridge Holdings secured a major development project in Dubai, Claire discovered she was pregnant. News of the pregnancy, instead of being a joyous revelation, felt oddly bittersweet. Edward's initial reaction was subdued. In private, he expressed excitement, hugging Claire as she showed him the positive test. Yet that smile flickered with worry. He joked about having to reorganize his business trips, but Claire sensed tension in his words. Over the weeks, she watched him bury himself deeper into conference calls and expansions. Instead of cherishing the pregnancy, he appeared increasingly distant. She wanted to believe that once the project in Dubai settled, he would refocus on family. Little did she know, her husband's distractions ran far deeper than corporate deals. At first, Vanessa Lombardi was just a name whispered in the corridors of Aldridge Holdings. She was introduced as an external consultant, a high-profile marketing strategist from Milan. She walked into the offices on the upper floors of Aldridge Tower with the kind of confidence usually reserved for royalty. Clad in a sharp Gucci suit and carrying an Hermes Birkin bag, she instantly turned heads. Rumors spread among the staff that she had ties to European aristocracy. Others claimed she was merely a self-made marketing genius who had soared to success on her cunning. All that mattered to Edward's advisors was that Vanessa brought fresh ideas and an impressive network of potential investors. Edward, whose thirst for expansion was at an all-time high, was intrigued. He invited her for one-on-one meetings in his executive suite. Those meetings were intended to discuss brand strategies for Aldridge Holdings' new developments in Asia and the Middle East. However, as the weeks passed, Claire noticed Edward's face light up when he spoke about Vanessa. He praised her acute understanding of luxury markets or her incredible synergy with Aldridge's vision. Claire grew suspicious. She had watched her husband conduct business with other accomplished women, but never had she seen him so enthralled. Initially, she dismissed her suspicions. Edward had never given her a reason to doubt his fidelity. She concluded that her hormones were playing tricks on her, that pregnancy could heighten one's anxieties. After all, the demands of corporate life in the Aldridge Empire were enormous. Perhaps he was just mesmerized by a new collaborator's brilliance. Then, small things began to pile up. Edward started coming home late, explaining that he had extra strategy sessions with Vanessa. He excused himself from Sunday family lunches, an Aldridge tradition, citing urgent calls from overseas clients, which ironically always occurred right after Vanessa arrived in London. Even more troubling, Claire discovered credit card statements that showed lavish dinners at top-tier restaurants, where the cost of a single bottle of wine could exceed thousands of pounds. Though she tried to remain calm, one evening, while Edward was out, Claire found something that made her heart freeze. She was rummaging through a stack of papers on his study desk, household bills, property tax forms, when she stumbled upon an airline itinerary. It detailed a flight for two from London to Milan, first-class seats, all expenses paid. One ticket was for Edward Aldridge. The second was for Vanessa Lombardi. The departure date was in 2 days. She confronted Edward the moment he stepped through the door. The clock read midnight when he arrived, looking disheveled. She thrust the paper at him, tears welling up in her eyes. In a trembling voice she asked, "What is this, Edward?" He stared at the itinerary with mild annoyance. "Claire, you're stressing yourself out, especially in your condition. Vanessa and I are going to Milan for a crucial brand presentation. Investors there want to meet both of us. It's purely business." Claire didn't believe him, but she knew better than to pick a fight in that moment. She was 4 months pregnant, exhausted, and fearful of the strain that conflict could place on her health. She let the subject drop, but something inside her broke that night. She remembered when Edward used to check on her well-being first, carry her up the stairs if she looked too tired, run her foot baths after a long day. That tenderness was nowhere to be found. Edward and Vanessa's trip to Milan was splashed across social media. Photos of them touring art galleries and meeting local elites at after-parties surfaced on business news websites. The synergy between them was obvious from the snapshots. They dressed alike, exchanged coy smiles, and seemed to be having a grand time extending the Aldridge brand. Claire, meanwhile, was left in London. Life felt surreal. Claire had never imagined she could feel so alone in her own home, a sprawling mansion overlooking Regent's Park, staffed by butlers and maids who tiptoed around her as if she were fragile porcelain. Each day she sensed the staff's pitying glances, as if they, too, recognized the distance growing between her and Edward. In her attempts to save her marriage, she sought out Harold Aldridge for advice. He was, after all, an old hawk in business, but had a surprising fondness for Claire. He invited her for afternoon tea in his estate, an ivy-covered mansion just outside the city. When she arrived, he greeted her with warm but cautious eyes. As soon as she mentioned her suspicions about Edward and Vanessa, Harold's face hardened. "I've heard rumors, Claire," he admitted, setting his cup of Earl Grey on a glass table. "Vanessa is ambitious, to say the least. But sometimes, in business, these alliances are beneficial. I'd be lying if I said it didn't concern me, but my priority is the company's interests." Claire nodded slowly. She understood that Harold's perspective was pragmatic. Still, she persisted. "He's changing, Harold. He's never home. We're having a child, and I feel like he doesn't care." Harold sighed, looking older than his years. "Let me speak to him. I'll remind him of his responsibilities." But the conversation with Harold yielded no immediate results. Edward returned from Milan with a triumphant grin, gushing about investor deals. He was overly complimentary about Vanessa's keen business sense, telling Claire that they might be traveling more often. Claire tried to stand up for herself, pointing out the stress on her pregnancy, the risks of feeling neglected, but Edward brushed her off. "Claire," he said one evening when she pleaded with him to slow down, "I'm expanding our empire for our child's future. Can't you see that? Your child will need a father, Edward," she whispered, fighting back tears, "and I need my husband." His only response was an exasperated sigh, as though Claire's worries were inconveniences. "I'm exhausted," he muttered, disappearing into his study, leaving her in a swirl of heartbreak. That night, Claire tossed and turned in their king-size bed, half hoping Edward might return to comfort her. Instead, she felt a surge of loneliness so profound that it took her breath away. Yet amidst her tears, a seed of determination sprouted within her. She resolved not to allow Edward to slip further without understanding the truth. When she finally did confront him about the nature of his relationship with Vanessa, Edward denied everything, but each denial felt half-hearted, especially given the extravagant expenses on joint dinners, weekend getaways for business, and gifts purchased from designer stores that he couldn't adequately explain. Claire tried to remain calm, but the lack of sincerity in his denial stung her deeply. By the time Claire was 6 months pregnant, their marriage had deteriorated. They spoke little and shared minimal space. Edward, apparently emboldened by Vanessa's presence, no longer hid his dissatisfaction with Claire. He complained about her mood swings, chastised her for not being supportive enough, and sometimes spent nights at a hotel rather than come home. But what truly ignited her heartbreak into fury was a conversation she overheard one late night. She had gone downstairs to fetch water when she heard Edward on a phone call in the living room. He was speaking softly, affectionately, the way he used to speak to her. Claire crept closer, heart pounding. "Yes, Vanessa, I know. She just doesn't understand what we have. I'll deal with it, I promise." He hung up moments later, unknowing that Claire had heard everything. She retreated to her bedroom, determined not to cause a scene. But the confirmation shattered her illusions. There was no more doubt. Edward had fallen for Vanessa, completely. The following morning, Claire confronted Edward after breakfast. She demanded honesty, tears brimming in her eyes, her voice shaking with the weight of betrayal. Edward, rather than express remorse, folded his arms. "You're overreacting," he said coldly. "Vanessa and I are just close. We're building important ties for the company. If I sense hostility from you, Claire, it only makes everything worse." She couldn't believe her ears. "You're blaming me? I'm pregnant with your child, and you're gallivanting around with another woman." Edward's eyes narrowed. "How dare you speak to me like this?" he growled. "Do you think you can hold my child over my head?" The ensuing argument was volcanic. Rage, accusations, tears, and heartbreak collided in that vast marble-floored dining room. Edward ended it by storming out of the house, leaving Claire trembling, nearly fainting with sorrow. A maid had to help her into a chair and call the family physician, who scolded Edward for putting her under extreme stress. But that scolding only hardened Edward's attitude. 1 week later, in a moment that would forever be etched in Claire's mind, he declared that she should leave the house if she couldn't support his vision. "You can return when you're ready to respect me," Edward said. His voice was quiet but loaded with bitterness. "I don't need someone in this home who tears me down at every turn. You may be the mother of my child, but that doesn't give you a free pass to ruin my life." Fighting through tears, Claire pleaded for him to reconsider. She reminded him of their vows, their love story. He remained stone-faced. Finally, with a mixture of devastation and pride, Claire walked upstairs, packed a few essential belongings, and left her marital home. At 7 months pregnant, she found herself in a taxi, heading toward her parents' smaller but welcoming suburban home. Her mother, Linda Matthews, wept upon seeing her daughter arrive in tears, suitcase in hand, pregnant belly pronounced. "What on earth happened, sweetheart?" she asked, ushering Claire inside. Claire could hardly form the words. All she knew was that she had to protect her unborn child from the chaos raging in Edward's life. She resolved to file for separation if he didn't come to his senses. However, the days passed and no phone call came from Edward. Instead, she learned from Harold that Edward had moved Vanessa into the Aldridge mansion. The staff was apparently instructed to treat Vanessa as the new mistress of the house. With Claire gone, Vanessa wasted no time positioning herself at the center of Edward's life. She managed Aldridge Holdings' marketing strategies, but also turned her attention to Edward's personal finances. She convinced him that investing heavily in innovative projects across Europe would yield extraordinary returns. In truth, these so-called innovations were suspicious ventures spearheaded by her mysterious connections. Edward, enthralled by Vanessa's beauty and cunning, signed off on transfers of large sums from his personal accounts into shell companies he knew little about. When Harold questioned the prudence of these investments, Edward brushed him aside. The father and son's relationship soured. Harold retreated to his estate in frustration. Meanwhile, Vanessa lived like royalty. She used Edward's black American Express card to buy a brand new Rolls-Royce, presenting it as a corporate necessity to impress foreign investors. She had personal shoppers scour Louis Vuitton, Dior, and Cartier boutiques to cater to her every sartorial desire. The staff at the Aldridge mansion whispered that she spent more in a day than Claire ever did in a month. The most startling transformation was Edward himself. He partied regularly with Vanessa in upscale clubs, posed for paparazzi shots that appeared in tabloid columns, and indulged in extravagances that overshadowed his previous charitable and measured approach. The philanthropic Edward, who once accompanied Claire to children's hospitals, had vanished. Amid this whirlwind of spending, Vanessa began a personal mission to tear down any lingering ties. Edward had to Claire. She insisted that he let the lawyers finalize a divorce, citing that it was bad optics to be legally bound to a woman he had no intention of reconciling with. Edward, bitter and resentful, succumbed to Vanessa's suggestion. Across town, Claire was now 8 months pregnant, trying to hold herself together emotionally and financially. Though she came from a respected family of attorneys, her parents were not nearly as wealthy as the Aldridges. Fortunately, her father, Henry Matthews, was adamant that she would never want for anything. They set up a small guest room, comfortable enough, but a far cry from the opulence Claire had grown used to. Still, she preferred their modest home, brimming with genuine warmth over the cold, cavernous mansion Edward once shared with her. Despite the heartbreak, Claire mustered her strength. She consulted a divorce lawyer, an old friend from her law school days, and prepared to fight for her rights and the welfare of her unborn child. The lawyer assured her that Edward would be obligated to pay child support and possibly alimony. Given the circumstances, still, Claire was anxious. Edward had not only cast her aside, but was under the tight grip of a manipulative mistress. Would he even abide by legal obligations, or would he challenge her to a grueling court battle? The fear of future conflict weighed on her like a boulder. Yet, ironically, this fear also stoked a fire in her heart, an unwavering resolve to protect her child from any harm. If Edward was too blind to see the truth, then she would fight alone. Edward's so-called high of life with Vanessa soon spiraled into something more ominous. He not only granted her access to his personal fortune, but also started to shift company resources toward her recommended projects. Some of these projects never materialized. Others reported losses that seemed suspiciously orchestrated. Vanessa brushed off the concerns. "Trust the process," she whispered, her voice dripping with confidence. "You have to spend money to make money, Edward. Think of the potential returns." However, cracks began to appear. High-level employees at Aldridge Holdings resigned, citing ethical disagreements with new directives. Long-time investors pulled out because they couldn't get clear answers on where their funds were going. Even the media began asking questions about unusual deals and opaque partnerships associated with the Aldridge brand. Edward, in denial, clung to Vanessa. Under her spell, he believed that these losses were mere stepping stones to a triumphant new era for Aldridge Holdings. Whenever doubt crept in, she lavished him with affection or convinced him of her unwavering loyalty, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that she was leading him down a treacherous path. One evening, Vanessa hosted a lavish party at the Aldridge mansion, inviting foreign investors, socialites, and influencers. The event was a spectacle of gold and crystal, featuring endless champagne fountains, live musicians flown in from Italy, and decorations from the most expensive designers in Europe. Edward floated among the guests, bragging about expansions in Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. In the corner, Vanessa laughed with suspiciously slick-looking men who reeked of shady business connections. By midnight, when the party was at its peak, Harold Aldridge made a sudden appearance. He navigated the crowd with a grim expression. Upon spotting Edward, he pulled him aside. "Edward," Harold hissed, "I've had enough of these fiascos. Do you realize how many red flags are piling up? Our finances are in tatters. Investors have called me non-stop." Edward tried to brush it off, but Harold was furious. "She's destroying you," he said, his voice trembling. "And if you're not careful, she'll destroy everything your grandfather and I built." Edward responded with drunken arrogance, slurring his words. "Old man, go home. Vanessa is the future. You're just living in the past." Incensed, Harold left, vowing he would never watch his son ruin the Aldridge name without a fight. While Edward and Vanessa's exploits escalated, Claire's pregnancy reached its final weeks. She had hoped Edward might check in with her, if only out of concern for the child, but he remained distant. Claire's water broke unexpectedly in the early hours of a cool autumn morning. Panic gripped her. Her parents rushed her to the hospital, where she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy named Noah. The labor was difficult, prolonged by the emotional stress she had endured in recent months, but the moment she held her son, her heart brimmed with fierce love and protection. In the hospital room, Claire's mother, Linda, gently cradled Noah while her father, Henry, stood by the door, anxiously looking at Claire. "Have you told Edward?" he asked softly. Claire shook her head. She had called his phone multiple times, but received no answer. She even tried leaving messages with his personal assistant. Nothing came of it. Edward was absent for Noah's entrance into the world. Though it broke her heart that Edward wasn't there, the experience solidified Claire's resolve. She would raise Noah with or without Edward's support. She hoped, perhaps naively, that once Edward learned of his son's birth, he might come around. That fatherly instinct would awaken, overshadowing any illusions Vanessa had spun. However, a week passed. Then two. No word from Edward, no flowers, no phone call, not even a text. The tabloids, meanwhile, splashed photos of Edward and Vanessa attending glamorous galas. Claire could only shake her head in disbelief. How could the man she once loved, the man who had once wanted to build a beautiful life with her, be so callous? Friends advised Claire to go public with her story, to shame Edward into stepping up. But she resisted. She had always valued privacy, and she didn't want Noah's life to start as fodder for scandal. Instead, she pressed her legal case. Her lawyer filed papers demanding child support and acknowledgement of paternity. At the same time, Harold contacted Claire, expressing immense regret for what his son had done. He asked if he could visit to see his grandson. Despite the fractures in the family, Claire agreed. When Harold arrived, carrying a plush teddy bear bigger than Noah, he wept upon seeing the newborn. "I'm so sorry, my dear," he whispered, his voice choked with guilt. "I never wanted this to happen." "Edward is not himself," Claire nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She wished Harold's apology could erase months of betrayal, but at least he cared about his grandson. She saw how gently Harold held Noah, his gaze a mixture of sorrow and wonder. In that moment, Claire realized that Harold might become the father figure her child needed if Edward was truly lost. Meanwhile, the business side of Edward's life continued to crumble. Audits exposed that large sums of money had been transferred to obscure companies owned by Vanessa's associates. Angry board members of Aldridge Holdings demanded an explanation, but Edward, intoxicated by Vanessa's charms, defended her relentlessly. He believed Vanessa's claim that these were crucial stepping stones to break into untapped markets. But project deadlines came and went without tangible results. Slowly, Edward ran out of excuses. The media caught wind of the fiasco, raising serious questions about fraudulent activities within Aldridge Holdings. Under mounting pressure, Edward turned to Vanessa for reassurance, only to find her elusive. She no longer spent as many nights at the mansion, citing urgent business trips. Desperate for answers, Edward tried to track her whereabouts. To his shock, many of the contact numbers she'd given him turned out to be disconnected. One day, in a moment of panic, Edward attempted to log into a joint account they had set up, a special investment fund that contained a significant chunk of his personal fortune. To his horror, the account was empty. Millions of pounds gone, transferred just days prior to an overseas bank in a country that did not disclose account holders. A wave of disbelief and dread hit Edward. He scrambled to reach Vanessa, calling incessantly, but she didn't answer. He drove to the penthouse apartment he had leased for her in Mayfair. It was vacant. The landlord reported that someone matching Vanessa's description had checked out the previous morning, paying the remainder of the lease in cash. The mistress was gone, and she had taken a fortune with her. Realizing he had been conned, Edward fell into despair. He called private investigators, the police, anyone who might help him locate Vanessa. But in an international city, teeming with transient figures, Vanessa was just another face who had come and gone, a ghost. The scandal rocked the company's foundation. Aldridge Holdings saw its stock plummet overnight when news of the financial mismanagement broke. Investors demanded Edward's resignation. Even Harold, despite his paternal instinct to protect his son, had to agree for the sake of the company's survival. Edward was forced out of his CEO position. Press conferences were held. Aldridge Holdings tried to distance itself from Edward's reckless decisions, emphasizing that most of the suspicious activities had been orchestrated through Edward's personal channels. Nevertheless, the brand's reputation suffered a near-fatal blow, and it took all of Harold's cunning, along with the board's crisis management teams, to keep the company afloat. Edward also found himself personally liable for debts and legal claims. The mansion he and Claire had once shared had been heavily mortgaged in secret to fund some of Vanessa's ventures. Creditors lined up at his door, threatening lawsuits, repossession of assets, and public humiliation. With nowhere else to turn, he retreated to the only place he could think of his father's estate. Harold, though furious, couldn't bear to see his son homeless. He allowed Edward a spare room, yet their interactions were strained. The father made it clear that Edward was a guest, not the prodigal heir returning triumphantly. Thus, Edward, once a charismatic figure leading an international empire, found himself penniless, disgraced, and alone. He discovered there was more than one kind of homelessness beyond the physical. It was a desolation of spirit, an emptiness that hollowed him from within every time he recalled how he had banished his pregnant wife for a woman who vanished like a phantom into the night. Late one evening, Edward sat in a dimly lit room in his father's estate, flipping through old photographs. His hands trembled as he lingered on an image of him and Claire during their wedding day in Paris. She wore a radiant smile, her eyes brimming with hope while he stood beside her, looking at her as if she were the center of his universe. In that moment, a torrent of regret washed over him. He remembered Claire's gentle touch, the way she hummed soft lullabies even before she was pregnant, envisioning a future with a child, he realized with horror, he had not even met. His son was now a month old. He had missed the birth. Shame and self-loathing threatened to crush him. Grabbing his phone, Edward scrolled through old text messages he had ignored. There were repeated calls and messages from Claire, short pleas like, "Please pick up or I'm going into labor. Where are you?" His heart twisted in agony as he pictured Claire alone in a hospital room, suffering both physical pain and heartbreak. Unable to endure the guilt, Edward dialed Claire's number. It rang and rang and rang. No response. He tried again the next morning, and the next. Finally, on the third day, Claire answered in a tired voice. "What do you want, Edward?" Hearing her voice for the first time in months shattered him. He stammered an apology, struggling to find the right words. I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I messed up. I need to see you. I need to see our son." Claire's silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her tone was resolute. "Why now?" she asked. "Was it because Vanessa left you? Because you lost your fortune? Or do you genuinely care about our child?" Edward tried to explain himself, but his words tumbled out clumsily. He admitted his mistakes, confessed his regret, and asked for a chance to see Noah. Claire hesitated. She had been through a whirlwind of emotional devastation. Hope had burned her too many times. Finally, she said, "We'll see, I'll think about it." Edward's relief was tinged with uncertainty. Would she forgive him? Did he even deserve forgiveness? A few weeks later, Claire agreed to meet Edward in a public park near her parents' home. It was a crisp morning with a slight breeze, leaves turning vibrant shades of orange and red. Edward's heart pounded as he arrived early, scanning the surroundings anxiously. He wore a simple coat, a far cry from his former tailored suits. When Claire approached, pushing a stroller, Edward felt a surge of emotion that nearly stole his breath. She looked different, paler, thinner, as though the past months had drained the life out of her. But in her eyes, he glimpsed the same quiet strength he had once fallen in love with. Noah was nestled inside the stroller, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Edward swallowed hard, feeling tears threaten as he knelt down to see his son's tiny face. The baby blinked, yawned, and looked around curiously. "Hi, Noah," Edward whispered. "I'm your dad." Claire stood by, arms crossed, watching intently. Edward gingerly lifted Noah out of the stroller, holding him against his chest. The baby gave a small squawk, then settled, gazing up at him with wide eyes. In that moment, Edward realized how completely he had failed both Claire and their son. "Thank you for letting me see him," he said, turning to Claire. "I know I don't deserve it." Claire nodded, her expression unreadable. "He deserves a father, regardless of our issues. But I need to know you're serious about being there for him." "I am," Edward promised. His voice shook with sincerity. "I'll do anything to make it right, not just financially, but truly be present." Claire gazed at him for a long while. She sighed, and tears pricked her eyes. "We'll see, Edward. Trust isn't rebuilt in a day." Despite her lingering pain, Claire allowed Edward supervised visits. He came by twice a week, bringing small gifts for Noah, sharing in feeding times, occasionally changing diapers under Claire's watchful eye. Edward's efforts were clumsy, especially in the presence of her protective parents, who made it clear they had not forgiven him easily. But each time he held his son, Edward felt a glimmer of redemption. The corporate king, who once reveled in boardroom battles, now found his greatest challenge was earning the trust of a baby who didn't even realize the magnitude of his father's betrayal. Meanwhile, Harold oversaw the restructuring of Aldridge Holdings, trying to salvage the family name. He reached out to Claire, offering financial assistance, but she preferred to maintain a sense of independence, at least until the legal aspects of custody and divorce were settled. The press, predictably, was merciless. Headlines like "Millionaire duped by Mistress," "The fall of Edward Aldridge," circulated with fervor. Claire was spared the worst of it, as most tabloids chose to focus on Edward's downfall and Vanessa's disappearance rather than tarnish the image of a grieving mother. Occasionally, Edward would look at the tabloids and cringe. He realized the entire city viewed him as a cautionary tale, a fool who threw away his marriage and fortune for a fleeting fling. But his shame was overshadowed by one desire: to piece together what was left of his life, starting with the family he had forsaken. Just as Edward began showing signs of genuine effort, a rumor emerged that Vanessa had surfaced in Monaco. Edward's private investigator confirmed a possible sighting. She was reportedly connected to another wealthy businessman, moving in circles reminiscent of her time with Edward. The news rattled him. Part of him wanted revenge. He fantasized about confronting her, demanding the millions she had stolen. Another part felt relief. At least he had an answer to where she went. But one unstoppable emotion was guilt. If he had only realized her manipulations sooner, he wouldn't have lost Claire, his position, and his dignity. The private investigator also provided leads indicating that Vanessa might be planning an even bigger con in the future, targeting unsuspecting millionaires across Europe. Though Edward felt vindictive, he lacked the resources to chase her across continents. He had to focus on the present. Nevertheless, the threat of Vanessa lingered like a shadow. He worried that if she returned, she could attempt to sabotage any progress he was making with Claire. He feared that maybe part of him was still susceptible to her manipulations. He prayed that if their paths crossed again, he would have the strength to resist her. Weeks turned into months. Edward tried to prove his sincerity to Claire by taking on odd consulting projects, any legitimate work he could find to support Noah. Though these projects paid a fraction of what he once earned, it demonstrated an important shift in his priorities. He attended parenting classes, surprising Claire with knowledge about feeding schedules, infant health, and child safety. He even began a college fund for Noah with the modest earnings he made. Slowly, Claire saw cracks in her bitterness, replaced by cautious hope. One afternoon, Edward asked Claire if he could visit her parents' home for dinner, a family dinner that included him. Claire hesitated but eventually agreed, provided her father was okay with it. Henry Matthews, initially skeptical, consented for the sake of his grandson. That evening was tense. Edward arrived in a simple car he had purchased after selling his luxury vehicles to cover debts. He wore a casual shirt and jeans, looking more humble than ever. Linda served a hearty meal, and although conversation was stiff at first, laughter emerged when Noah giggled from his high chair, flinging mashed carrots onto Edward's shirt. The comedic moment was a small step toward thawing the ice. Edward rose from the table, carefully taking Noah in his arms to wipe off the carrot-smeared face, cooing at him with a gentleness that surprised everyone. For an instant, the harsh memories seemed to fade, replaced by something that felt almost normal, almost like a family gathering. Even as personal bridges were being rebuilt, legal matters loomed. Claire's lawyer pressed Edward to finalize the divorce or to propose a legal separation that would clarify custody and support. For Claire, any path toward reconciliation, if it ever existed, had to be built on a foundation of honesty and responsibility. She insisted on a formal agreement to ensure Noah's financial well-being. Edward readily agreed to whatever terms her lawyer presented, as if desperate to display genuine remorse. He provided documentation of his current finances, or what was left of them, and arranged for a trust fund for Noah. The process forced both of them to confront their painful history. They had to detail Edward's infidelity and the ways in which he had neglected Claire during her pregnancy. Edward also had to recount the financial ruin Vanessa had caused, including evidence that he had mortgaged the marital home without Claire's knowledge. Claire realized how precarious her life could have been if she had remained in that house, ignorant of Edward's reckless actions. Eventually, a settlement was reached. Claire retained primary custody of Noah, and Edward would have generous visitation rights, along with a strict schedule of child support payments. The divorce was to be finalized within the year unless Claire chose to pause proceedings. Despite her father's urging to finalize and move on, Claire felt compelled to wait just a little longer. Curious whether Edward's transformation was genuine or fleeting. While Edward slowly rebuilt a fragile bond with Claire, fate decided to give Vanessa a taste of karmic retribution. Through a chain of events that made global headlines, her new wealthy target in Monaco discovered her attempts to siphon funds into fraudulent companies. The authorities were alerted, and Vanessa was caught trying to escape on a yacht. She was arrested on charges of fraud, money laundering, and forgery. News of Vanessa's arrest flashed across European tabloids. Infamous con artist Vanessa Lombardi apprehended in Monaco. For Edward, it was a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. He felt relief that she might face consequences for the havoc she had wrought, but a small part of him felt renewed guilt for allowing her into his life at the expense of Claire and Noah. Harold wasted no time contacting investigators, hoping to retrieve at least a portion of the stolen funds. It turned out that Vanessa had shifted money through a labyrinth of offshore accounts. But there was a chance that the authorities might trace some of it back to Edward's name. Even if the sum recovered was a fraction of what was lost, it could help Edward settle some of his debts. When the story broke, Claire found Edward outside her parents' home one afternoon. sitting on the porch bench in a pensive state. "I suppose you've heard," she said, breaking the silence. He nodded, looking more peaceful than she had seen him in a long time. "Yes, she's finally been caught." She studied his face, searching for a flicker of joy or vengeance. Instead, he seemed simply weary. "It's over," he whispered. "Maybe now I can truly move on." Claire sat beside him, looking out at the neighborhood. "I hope you do," she said softly, "for Noah's sake and yours." In the weeks following Vanessa's dramatic arrest, the investigators assigned to Edward's case made headway tracing a fragment of the fortune she had siphoned. While the amount recovered was nowhere near enough to restore Edward's former status, it helped him pay off several immediate debts hanging over his head like a guillotine blade. He also managed, through a back-breaking set of negotiations, to refinance the Aldridge mansion. By now, the once gleaming property had lost a portion of its market value due to the negative press, but at least it remained in his name, albeit under a mortgage strict enough to keep him awake at night. Still, it was the closest thing to relief Edward had felt in a long time. With some debts settled and the threat of foreclosure temporarily contained, he noticed a shift in his day-to-day life. For one, the constant ringing of bill collectors ceased to be an hourly torment. When he walked the streets of London, he no longer felt compelled to duck at every passing camera, though the occasional tabloid photographer still lurked around corners. The greatest shift, however, was far more personal. He had begun seeing Noah consistently, doing more than just stopping by Claire's parents' home for short visits. If Claire needed groceries, he volunteered to pick them up. If she had a stack of mail to sort through insurance forms and legal documents, he offered to handle the simpler tasks or at least watch Noah so she could concentrate. Though she still had reasons to be wary, Claire reluctantly accepted his help. Her return to part-time legal work was demanding enough, and an extra set of hands, however unsteady they might have once been, was better than none. During those visits, Edward found new meaning in the rhythm of ordinary life bottle feedings, diaper changes, and quiet lullabies in the early evening. He had once been a man obsessed with power, whether that meant cutting multi-million-pound deals or hosting extravagant charity galas to flaunt his influence. Now, the simple act of reading a bedtime story to Noah felt more fulfilling than any business accolade he'd ever earned. Each time the baby cooed in recognition or clutched at his finger, Edward felt a surge of something he could only call redemption. Claire observed his transformation from the sidelines, her emotions tangled in knots. She could see genuine care in his eyes when he held their son, an unmistakable softness that reminded her of the man she had once married. Yet the memories of betrayal lingered, refusing to vanish in a single wave of good intentions. Each time she felt her guard slipping, she reminded herself of the nights she cried alone, pregnant and abandoned, or the humiliating moment he told her to leave their home. Late one evening, after Noah had been tucked into his crib, Edward asked to speak with Claire in the quiet of the living room. Her parents had gone to bed, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant glow of a street lamp outside. Nervously, Edward cleared his throat. He sat on the sofa, elbows on his knees, twisting his hands as if searching for the right words. "I know we have a complicated past," he began, voice trembling with the weight of his confession. "But the more time I spend with Noah, the more I realize I was an utter fool to abandon you and him. Everything I thought I needed with Vanessa was a lie. You were always the reality that kept me grounded." Claire's heart hammered in her chest. A year ago, she would have melted at his sincerity. Now, caution anchored her. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, speaking slowly, "but it's not just about me. You hurt our entire family. You have to prove consistently that you're going to be here, not just physically, but emotionally. Edward swallowed hard, tears threatening to breach his composure. "I love you, Claire," he whispered. "I always have, and I'm not looking for a quick fix or an easy forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm all in. No more secrets, no more lies." He reached out tentatively, and for a moment Claire let her hand rest in his. The feel of his touch unleashed a swirl of memories, both blissful and agonizing. Tears rimmed her eyes as she recalled her wedding day, her pregnancy, and the heartbreak that came after. "I need time," she said, voice choked with emotion. "I'm not saying never, Edward, but I can't ignore everything that happened. Trust has to be earned." She withdrew her hand gently. Edward nodded, a mixture of sorrow and relief etched into his features. Though uncertainty loomed, they shared a moment of fragile understanding, free, if only briefly, from the bitterness that had once consumed them. And in that single exchange, each realized that while their wounds ran deep, a willingness to heal still remained. The months that followed were a testament to cautious rebuilding. Edward showed consistent devotion to Noah and respect towards Claire's boundaries. He helped with late-night feedings, took Noah for walks in the park, and even prepared dinners at her parents' home on occasion. He attended therapy sessions to address the shame and trauma from Vanessa's betrayal. Claire witnessed a side of Edward she had nearly forgotten. Though scars remained, she couldn't deny the warmth in her heart when she saw him cradling Noah, reading bedtime stories, or making silly faces to coax out baby giggles. For her part, Claire worked part-time at a legal firm that handled family and corporate law. Ironically, her own life experiences made her an even more empathetic advocate for her clients, many of whom faced complex marital or financial disputes. She found purpose in her work, a sense of self that wasn't tied to being Edward Aldridge's wife. Each day she grew stronger. Each day he grew more humbled. They forged a fragile truce, co-parenting in a way that put Noah first. Friends whispered that maybe they would reconcile. Journalists probed for sensational stories, but found themselves disappointed by the quiet normalcy that had taken root. On a cool morning, nearly a year after Noah's birth, Edward invited Claire to see the renovated wings of the Aldridge mansion. He had turned some lavish rooms into child-friendly spaces, a small play area, a cozy living room where they could read to Noah. It wasn't the showy extravagance Claire remembered. Rather, it was functional and surprisingly homey. As they stepped into what used to be the grand drawing room once filled with priceless art, Claire noticed family photos on the mantel. Pictures of her wedding day with Edward, snapshots of baby Noah, even images of her parents with him. It was a simple but powerful gesture. Edward took a deep breath. "I know memories of this house are painful for you. I asked you to leave when you were pregnant, and that's something I'll never forgive myself for. But I'm hoping we can create new memories here, ones that make you feel safe and valued." Claire's eyes lingered on a photograph of her and Edward in happier times. She remembered the day it was taken. They were laughing about some inside joke, entirely oblivious of heartbreak. She turned to look at him. His posture was different, less arrogant, more genuine. She realized she had reached a crossroads, either begin a new chapter of their life together or permanently remain apart. She walked over to him, took his hand, and squeezed it gently. "I can't promise everything will be perfect," she began, voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm willing to try, Edward. Not just for Noah, but because part of me still loves you too." A tear slipped down Edward's cheek. He pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her as if he feared letting go would shatter the fragile peace they had achieved. It wasn't a fairy tale conclusion. It was the start of a second chance, one forged through pain, regret, and the courage to move forward. Though betrayal can tear lives apart, it's our choices afterward that determine whether we remain broken or find a path to healing. Claire and Edward's journey wasn't easy. She faced abandonment at her most vulnerable, while he lost both his fortune and his dignity to a cunning mistress. Yet through relentless perseverance and an unwavering love for their son, they dared to rebuild. In finding the strength to forgive and the humility to atone, they discovered that a family can be reshaped, even when nearly destroyed.
He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence, like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals. Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error. But the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. "Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage." Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. "What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous?" Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. "She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal." Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. "Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning." Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. "You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly." The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her keycard didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. "This is my home. Get out of my way," she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. "He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled," Ava sneered. "I have every right to ask you to leave." Elizabeth was trembling with fury. "You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife." With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. "Jordan left these for you," she said. "He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave." Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. "I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. "He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs," Marcus warned. "But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal." It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple: attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. "You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out," Michelle warned. "He'll try to discredit you in front of the board." Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava, and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. "You're not supposed to be here," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. "I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting." Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. "Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders." "I am a serious stakeholder," Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation. Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with greying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing." She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. "They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust." A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. "Jordan, is this true?" Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. "This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds." "She's not." Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. "If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter." Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. "I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. "I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Miss Monroe, please step into my office." Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, but he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. "Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership." Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. "Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge, then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team. Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up." Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. "You're investigating her?" A slow exhale from the other end. "Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas." Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. "We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that." Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. "Isn't that something your legal team handles?" A rueful laugh. "Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce." Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. "I'll do what I can," Elizabeth replied cautiously. "But how do I communicate with you about this?" Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. "And one more thing," Patricia said, before hanging up. "People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful." Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. "Keep digging," she urged, "and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details." Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. "That's strange," Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. "Why would he agree so easily?" Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. "Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board." But Michelle wasn't convinced. "I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know." The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. "We need to talk, face to face." She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half-smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz," he began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued. "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave, a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play," Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes, if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. "Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. "This is preposterous," she began. "We demand to see your proof." Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades, tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. "Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Miss Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated." Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. "This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation. Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet. Ava whirled on Elizabeth. You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me. Elizabeth's blood boiled. We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours. A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. Jordan, I need answers. Were you aware of these trades? Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed, Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully, she warned. We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. Have we sent this to the SEC? Not yet, the advisor responded. We wanted to confront them first. Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars, Hartridge asked. And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation. Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby, he announced quietly. Thank you, Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. I believe we might need you. Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust. Hartridge's face remained stony. I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability. Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on. Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability. Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. Stand down, sir, the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. Let him go. This is a private matter. Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises. Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't do that. I'm on the board. Not anymore, Hartridge said grimly. I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you. A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her, "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. I'm sorry you had to endure this, Ms. Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure. Elizabeth gave him a small nod. Thank you. I appreciate your fairness. She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun, striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy, and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. "They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. "They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature," Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines: Jordan Alberts, indicted for insider trading fraud and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future.